The heat inside a Panzer IV isn't just temperature. It is a physical weight, a heavy, oily blanket that presses against your eyelids and fills your throat with the taste of diesel and unwashed men. I remember it being July 1943. At least, the history books say it was July. In my memory, the sun was white-hot, bleaching the color out of the Russian steppe until the world looked like an overexposed photograph. But maybe that was just the fear. Fear has a way of turning the lights up too high. We were sitting in the belly of the beast, waiting. That's the worst part of war, the waiting. It gives you time to take apart your life and look at the pieces, like a transmission spread out on a workbench, wondering if you'll ever get it back together again. The air inside the turret was stagnant, thick with the smell of stale rye bread and the sharp, copper tang of anxiety sweating out of our pores. I sat huddled near the rear firewall, my back against the steel division that separated the crew from the engine bay. My domain. The others, Klaus, our commander. Jörg the gunner, Little Hans the loader. They saw the tank as a weapon, a fortress. I saw it for what it was. 30 tons of temperamental steel held together by bolts, tension, and prayer. I had my ear pressed against the metal, listening. It was faint, so faint that if I shifted my boot on the floor plate, the sound of grit grinding on steel would drown it out. But it was there, a rhythmic irregularity in the idle of the Maybach HL 120 TRM engine. To anyone else, it was just the rumble of 12 cylinders drinking gasoline. To me, a man who had spent his youth in Leipzig with grease permanently etched into his fingerprints, it was a scream. "Stop doing that," Klaus said. His voice was tight, strained. He was cleaning his binoculars for the 10th time, the chamois leather squeaking against the glass. "You look like a doctor trying to diagnose a corpse." "It's the number 4 cylinder," I murmured, not moving my head from the firewall. "Or maybe the valve clearance. It's skipping, just a fraction of a second." A hesitation. "It's fine, Gunther." Jörg chimed in from the gunner's seat. He was carving a notch into the breech of the 75 MKW K40 with a pocket knife, adding to a tally that I'm not sure was entirely accurate. Memory is a funny thing. I recall him having 12 notches, but perhaps it was only 3. The beast is purring. You're just hearing your own heart trying to jump out of your chest. "It's not a purr," I snapped, wiping a streak of grease from my forehead. My hand came away black. "It's a murmur, a arrhythmia. If the timing chain has slack, and we push the RPMs past 2500, then we break down and the Ivans use us for target practice," Hans said, the heavy clang of a 75 shell sliding into the ready rack punctuating his sentence. He was too young, Hans, barely 18. I think he had a girl back in Munich. Or maybe it was just a picture of a movie star he kept in his tunic. I can't remember her face anymore. "Relax, Gunther. If it breaks, you fix it. That's why you're here. You're the wizard." I wasn't a wizard. I was a mechanic who knew that machines didn't care about courage or the fatherland. Machines cared about lubrication, tolerance, and heat expansion. And right now, the machine was telling me it was sick. It gnawed at me. It was a flaw in my universe. The world outside could fall apart, politics, borders, morality. But inside this hull, the gears had to mesh perfectly. If they didn't, we died. It was that simple. I closed my eyes, trying to visualize the camshaft spinning, the rockers tapping. Was it a worn spring? A piece of carbon buildup? Schmidt. Klaus's voice was sharp, cutting through my diagnostic trance. Headset on. Net is active. I pulled the heavy rubber cups over my ears, the static hissing like rain on a tin roof. Rain. God, I would have killed for rain. Just a drop to cool the steel that was already burning my skin. But the sky was clear. Or was it? Sometimes I remember smoke so thick it blotted out the sun at noon. "All units," the voice crackled in my ears, distinct and terrifyingly calm. It was the colonel, or maybe the general. "Rank dissolves in the acid of memory. Advance on Prokhorovka. Objectives are clear. Crush them." The order hit us like a physical blow. Klaus kicked the driver's shoulder. "Move out." Full throttle, the driver, a silent man named Weber whose face I can no longer conjure, stomped on the accelerator. The Maybach roared, a deep, guttural bellow that shook the fillings in my teeth. The tank lurched forward, the tracks biting into the dry Russian earth, throwing up a cloud of dust that instantly blinded the periscopes. As the RPMs climbed, the roar deafened us, drowning out thoughts, drowning out fear. But I could still hear it, buried under the thunder of war, that tiny, malicious metronome. It was faster now, and louder. The steppe was not a place anymore. It was a condition of noise and violence. We were rolling through a valley of death, quite literally. Though I don't recall fearing evil. I didn't have the capacity for it. I was too busy monitoring the oil pressure gauge. The needle was twitching, just a little, like a nervous eye. Outside, the Battle of Kursk was unfolding in a panorama of industrial slaughter. Through my vision slit, the world was a blur of brown dust and black smoke. The horizon was jagged with the silhouettes of burning machines, our panzers. Their T-34s, bonfires of steel, consuming the men inside them. The smell changed then. The stale bread scent was gone, replaced by the acrid, biting stench of cordite and something sweeter, sickeningly rich. Roasting meat. No, surely it was just the burning rubber of road wheels. I have to believe it was the rubber. We were part of a massive wedge, the Ghost Division, trying to punch through the Soviet armor belt. But we weren't ghosts. We were heavy, rattling targets. Contact front, Klaus screamed over the intercom. 11 o'clock. Range 800. The tank slewed violently to the left. The engine stuttered before catching itself. My stomach dropped. That was the transmission struggling to keep up with the torque spike. Every gear change felt like a hammer blow to the chassis. Steady, Klaus hissed. Fire, the whole tank convulsed. The recoil of the main gun is something you don't just hear. You feel it in your marrow. The breech slammed back, ejecting the spent casing with a metallic that rang like a church bell in hell. Smoke filled the fighting compartment, stinging my eyes. Hit, Jurg yelled. He's brewing up. I risked a glance through the slit. A T-34, 200 meters away, had lost its turret. A fountain of flame jetted from the open hatch, reaching for the sky. I felt no triumph, only a cold, professional assessment. Traverse right, new target, Klaus ordered. Weber shifted gears again. The engine screamed in protest, a high-pitched whine overlaying the bass rumble. The ticking sound I had heard earlier had evolved. It was now a distinct knock, a hammer hitting the engine block from the inside. Ease up, Weber, I shouted into the mic, forgetting protocol. She can't take the revs. The valves are floating. Shut up, Schmidt, Klaus barked. Drive, Weber. Flank him. We crested a small ridge, the suspension groaning under the stress. Suddenly, the world turned white. There was a sound like the sky tearing open, followed instantaneously by a ringing impact that felt like being inside a bell when a giant strikes it. A 76 Michel had glanced off our frontal armor. The tank shuddered to a halt, the kinetic energy transferring through the steel and into our bones. My head slammed against the radio rack. Darkness for a second, then the red haze of emergency lights. Or maybe it was blood in my eyes. Report, Klaus was screaming, but his voice sounded underwater. Ricochet, Jurg gasped. We're still sealed, but the engine was coughing. It sounded like a dying man trying to clear his throat. The vibration in the floor plates became violent, a chaotic shaking that rattled the tools in my belt. It's the fuel feed, I muttered, dazed, my hand reaching instinctively for the toolkit. The shock knocked the pump timing out, or the lines are cracked. Get us moving, Klaus yelled. We're sitting ducks here. Weber cranked the starter. The engine caught, sputtered, and roared back to life. But it sounded wrong. Broken. It was running on 10 cylinders, maybe 9. We limped forward, the power gone, the tank sluggish and heavy. Then the light outside changed. The dust cloud above us darkened, not from smoke, but from shadows. A high-pitched shrieking filled the air, a sound so terrifyingly distinctive that every soldier on the Eastern Front knew it in their nightmares. Katyusha rockets. Incoming, the first explosion rocked the earth 10 meters to our left, spraying shrapnel against the hull like hail. The second was closer. The ground beneath us heaved, and then the engine died. Not a stall, a seizure, a horrific metal-on-metal screech as a piston seized in the bore, followed by a final, suffocating silence from the engine bay. The heartbeat stopped. "Start it," Klaus screamed. "Start it, damn you." Weber hit the button. Nothing. The starter motor spun against a locked flywheel. "It seized," I whispered, the realization cold as ice water in my veins. "It's dead, Klaus. The engine is dead." Outside, the shrieking intensified. The barrage was walking right over us. Shrapnel rained down on the turret roof, a cacophony of distinct, terrifying pings. We were immobile, a 30-ton steel coffin sitting in the middle of the kill zone. We sat in the sudden, suffocating silence of the interior, listening to the death rain down outside. Trapped in the dark, the silence inside the Panzer IV was heavier than the steel plating surrounding us. It wasn't a true silence, of course. The world outside was ending. The earth shuddered rhythmically, a continuous epileptic fit caused by the Soviet artillery walking its way toward our shallow crater. But inside, the cessation of the Maybach engine's roar created a vacuum. The mechanical heart of our beast had seized, and in its absence, the human sounds became terrifyingly amplified. I heard the ragged, wet gasping of Weber in the driver's seat. I heard the of the turret ring as Klaus, our commander, shifted his weight, his boots slipping on the spent shell casings littering the floor. I heard the blood rushing in my own ears, a swooshing tide that matched the pounding of the shrapnel against the hull. We were a bell being rung by giants. "Report," and Klaus croaked. His voice was tight, stripped of the bravado he usually wore like a second uniform. "Seized," I repeated, my voice sounding hollow. "Piston, maybe, or the transmission locked. I need light." I reached for the switch of the auxiliary power unit, the small generator that kept our batteries alive and the interior lights dim but functional. I flicked it. The bulb in the ceiling cage flickered once, a sickly yellow pulse, and then died. Darkness, sudden and absolute, swallowed us. "Chase, Jörg." The loader whimpered from the darkness. They hit the auxiliary exhaust. "It's choking out." In the blackness, the smell hit me. It wasn't just the familiar scent of cordite and unwashed bodies. It was something sharper, acrid, hot oil dripping onto superheated metal. And underneath that, the faint, sweet sickly smell of raw gasoline. My stomach turned over. "Flashlight," I snapped, fumbling at my belt. I unhooked the heavy, hand-cranked dynamo lamp. My fingers, usually so dexterous, fingers that could tune a carburetor by touch alone, felt like numb sausages. I gave the crank 3 hard turns. A cone of pale, trembling light cut through the gloom. It swung wildly, illuminating snippets of terror. Weber's knuckles white as bone on the steering levers, Jörg's eyes wide and glistening, staring at nothing, the sweat dripping off Klaus's nose. I directed the beam toward the rear firewall, the steel bulkhead separating the crew compartment from the engine bay. Smoke was curling through the seams. "It's not just a seizure," I said, my mind racing, slipping into the diagnostic trance that was my pre-war life. I wasn't a soldier then. I was a mechanic in Leipzig. A problem was just a series of logical steps. We took a hit to the rear deck. Shrapnel must have pierced the engine covers. It severed a fuel line. "The fuel is hitting the manifold. Can you fix it from here?" Klaus asked. The play in his voice was naked. "He didn't order me. He begged me." I looked at the firewall. To access the damage from inside, I'd have to unbolt the entire inspection panel, a job that took 20 minutes in a dry workshop. We didn't have 20 minutes. We didn't have 20 seconds. "No," I whispered. The reality of it washed over me. We were sitting on a bomb. The fuel would pool. The heat of the engine block would rise. The vapors would catch. And then the ammunition. My greatest fear. It wasn't the bullet that killed you instantly. It was the brew-up, the flamethrower effect inside the turret. I had seen crews pulled out of Panzers that had burned. They looked like charred mannequins, fused to the metal they tried to escape. "Infantry," Weber screamed from the driver's port. "Ivans." 3 o'clock moving through the smoke. I swung the light to Klaus. He was looking at the periscope, then back at me. If we stay, I said, the words tasting like ash, we burn. If we wait, they toss a Molotov on the engine deck, and we burn. Gunther, Klaus said. He gripped my shoulder. His hand was trembling. We can't move. We can't traverse the turret fast enough without the engine. I have to go out, I said. The sentence hung in the foul air. To go outside was suicide. The air above the crater was thick with light. The Maxim guns were chewing up everything that stood more than a foot off the ground. You'll be cut to pieces, Jörg said, and will be cooked alive if I don't, I snapped, anger surging through the fear. I grabbed my canvas tool roll. It's the Magneto or the fuel line. If I can bypass the cut and patch the ignition, we can limp out. Just get me 5 minutes. 5 minutes is a lifetime, Gunther, Klaus said, but he was already moving. He racked the slide of his MP40. Jörg, get on the coaxial. Weber, button up and pray. I'll give you covering fire from the commander's hatch. I checked my pockets. Pliers, a roll of heavy-gauge wire I'd scavenged from a downed Stuka weeks ago. A 17 wrench. I looked at my crew one last time. In the flickering light of the dying dynamo, they looked like ghosts already. Covering fire, Klaus screamed. He threw the cupola hatch open. The noise of the battle slammed into us, a physical blow of roaring wind and explosions. Klaus rose up, firing his submachine gun into the smoke. I didn't let myself think. I didn't let myself imagine the bullet that had my name on it. I pushed open the loader's hatch and scrambled up, out of the steel womb and into the inferno. The heat on the engine deck was shocking. It wasn't just the summer sun of the steppe. The metal beneath me was radiating temperature like a stove top. I flattened myself against the hull, the rivets digging into my chest, as the air above me hissed and snapped. Bullets passing inches overhead. They sounded like angry insects. I crawled toward the rear, my boots slipping on the smooth armor. The world was a blur of brown dust and gray smoke. To my left, a T-34 burned, a pillar of black oily smoke rising into the sky. To my right I saw them, shapes in the wheat, advancing, the brown uniforms of the Soviet infantry. They were close, maybe 50 meters. Keep their heads down, Klaus roared from the turret, firing short, controlled bursts. I reached the engine access hatch. It was twisted, ravaged by the shrapnel hit. I jammed the pry bar under the lip and heaved. With a screech of tearing metal, it popped open. Smoke billowed out, blinding me. I coughed, waving it away, blinking tears from my eyes. There it was, the chaos of machinery. The fuel line to the number 4 cylinder was sheared clean off, spraying petrol onto the hot casing every time the pressure lingered. But worse, the Magneto housing was cracked. The ignition timing was gone. That's why she wouldn't start. I had to bypass the fuel cut and rig the Magneto. My hands were shaking. Not a tremble, but a violent, uncontrollable spasm. I looked at them grease-stained, scarred, the knuckles raw. I commanded. I grabbed the fuel line. It was slick with oil. I folded the copper tubing back on itself, crimping it shut with the pliers. We'd run on 11 cylinders. It would be rough, but it would run. Now the Magneto. I reached for the 17 wrench to loosen the housing bolt. My sweat-slicked fingers slipped. The wrench fell. It slid down the sloped armor of the rear deck, skittering toward the edge, toward the grass, toward the Russians. Time dilated. I watched the tool slide inch by inch. If it fell, we died. It was that simple. I lunged, not a soldier's lunge, but a desperate, sprawling grab. My fingertips brushed the cold steel of the wrench just as it teetered on the weld seam. I clamped my hand around it, gasping. My face pressed against the hot exhaust grate. I pulled it back. I forced a breath into my burning lungs. Hurry, Gunther. They're setting up a mortar, Klaus screamed. I worked with frantic precision. Loosen the bolt. Strip the scavenged wire with my teeth. Wrap the copper strands around the contact points, bypassing the shattered cap. It was a jury-rigged mess. A repair that would make my old master in Leipzig weep with shame. But it was beautiful. I twisted the final wire. I looked up. Through the haze, I saw a Russian soldier rise from the grass, arm pulled back, a grenade in his hand. Klaus's MP-40 barked. The soldier crumpled. The grenade exploded harmlessly in the wheat. Clear, I screamed, though I couldn't hear my own voice. I banged my fist twice on the turret roof, the signal. I scrambled back, crab walking over the turret, diving headfirst into the open hatch, just as a burst of machine gun fire raked the deck where I had been seconds before. I tumbled onto the floor plates, bruising my ribs, gasping for air. "Start it." Now, Klaus yelled, slamming the hatch shut. Weber hit the button. The starter groaned. I prayed to the machine. The engine caught. It roared to life, rough, coughing, missing a beat, but alive. The vibration shook the hull. "Go reverse. Get us out." The tracks ground into the earth, and the Panzer lurched backward, clawing its way out of the crater. We were moving. We were alive. I slumped against the ammunition rack, my chest heaving. I looked at my hands. They were black with oils and blood. Through the periscope, just as the smoke cleared, I saw it. A T-34-76, sitting hull down on the ridge we had just left. Its turret swung toward us. The black eye of its 76 cannon looked directly into my soul. Then the memory ends.